Man, those ribs were something else. I kept telling myself they were the best I'd ever made as I watched my wife, Abigail, giggle at some hushed comment my cousin Keith slipped into her ear. It was the 4th of July weekend in a quiet corner of suburban Omaha, and my backyard was buzzing with family who'd rolled in from all over to dig into my barbecue and act like we were still one big, happy clan. "Uncle Mason, can I borrow Mom's tablet?" That was 10-year-old Owen, tugging at my sleeve, Abigail's sister Marla's kid. Polite as always, a good boy. "Check with your mom first," I told him, flipping the ribs with my tongs. The sauce was sizzling just right under the Nebraska sun. Across the yard, Abigail gave a wave from where she stood by the cooler with Keith. "It's okay, hun. Just don't mess with anything," she called. I should have caught the way Keith's face stiffened when she said that, or how he quickly glanced away from the tablet in Owen's hands. But I was too focused on the grill, making sure every detail was spot on for the family. About 20 minutes later, Owen came sprinting from the side of the house, his face pale, looking like he'd seen a ghost. He clutched the tablet like it was a live grenade. "Uncle Mason," he whispered, darting his eyes around to make sure no one was listening. "I think something's weird with Aunt Abigail's photos." My stomach dropped. "What's that mean, kid?" I asked. He mumbled, "I was trying to find games, but I accidentally opened the camera app. There's a video." My hands froze. I set the tongs down, wiped the sauce off on my apron, and said, "Show me." We slipped behind the old shed in the corner of the yard out of sight. Owen handed me the tablet, his fingers shaking. The video was paused in the first frame, and my chest tightened at what I saw. Abigail's face. Keith's hands tangled in her hair. The timestamp said it was from 3 hours ago. I pressed play. "I've been waiting for this," Abigail's voice came through, low and urgent. She was leaning against the tool bench in my shed, Keith's lips brushing her shoulder. "We gotta be quick," he muttered, his hand moving to the hem of her sundress. "Mason will be back from the hardware store soon." "I'm done hiding," she whispered back, her voice heavy. The video ran for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of my wife and my cousin shattering 20 years of my life in the place where I tinker with my bike and stash the Halloween decorations. When it ended, I just stared at the blank screen. "Uncle Mason," Owen's voice sounded miles away. "You okay?" I glanced across the yard at Abigail, who was now scooping coleslaw onto a plate for my dad, Vernon, who'd just shown up after his latest stint of going AWOL. She was wearing the blue dress I'd gotten her for our anniversary, the one she said made her feel like $1,000,000. In that video, Keith had tugged it up past her hips. The ribs were starting to scorch on the grill. I could smell the char. "Mason, you good back there?" Abigail's voice rang out, all light and cheery. I turned slowly, the tablet still in my hands. She stood there, her smile flawless, not a single hair out of place. If I hadn't just seen that video, I'd have never suspected a thing. "Just making sure Owen's not getting into mischief," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She let out that laugh of hers, the one that used to make my heart skip. "Well, come back over. Your dad's spinning his old fishing tales again, and Keith's talking about starting a cornhole game." I looked at her for a long beat, soaking in her face. The last time I'd see her like this before everything broke apart. "Be there in a sec," I said. "Gotta save the ribs." I went back to the grill like it was my lifeline, brushing sauce on the meat, turning it every few minutes, checking the temp with my thermometer. Everything had to look normal. Abigail sat at the picnic table between Keith and my dad, chuckling at some story Keith was telling about his latest gym client. She'd always been a pro at keeping up appearances. 20 years together, and I was only now seeing how good she was at it. "Best ribs in the county, Mason," Abigail called out when I brought the platters over. "Don't you always say that?" I set the meat down right in front of Keith, who wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly fascinated by his beer bottle. Vernon slapped my shoulder. "This guy's got a gift. Remember when you were a kid and turned those burgers into hockey pucks?" Everyone laughed, even me, though it felt like someone else's voice. I sat across from Keith, slicing into my ribs. They were perfect, juicy, smoky, just right. I chewed slowly, watching him fidget. He kept stealing glances at Abigail, quick, nervous looks she ignored like a pro. "So, Keith," I said, keeping my tone easy, "how's the personal training gig going?" He shrugged, eyes on his plate. "Doing all right. Picked up a few new clients this week." "Anyone I'd know?" I asked. Abigail's fork froze midair. Keith's face turned red. "Just some folks from the fitness center," he mumbled. "Nothing big." "Bet they keep you on your toes," I said. "All that close-up coaching." The table went quiet. Vernon glanced between us like he could smell trouble. Marla was busy trying to get Owen to eat his green beans. Mason, Abigail said, her voice sharp, what's with you? I took another bite, savoring the smoky tang. Just chatting with my cousin, darling. Keith finally looked at me. There was guilt in his eyes, sure, but also fear, and a spark of something else, like he was daring me to call him out. So I did. I stood up fast, my chair screeching against the patio. Keith's eyes widened, but before he could move, I grabbed his shirt and hauled him up, his plate crashing to the ground. Mason, what the hell? He started, but I shoved him back into the food table, sending coleslaw and baked beans everywhere. You think I'm blind? I growled, inches from his face. He tried to push me off, but I've been hauling lumber for 2 decades. I had strength and fury on my side. We hit the ground hard, rolling across the patio as people shouted. Stop it! Abigail screamed. Both of you, stop! Keith landed a wild punch to my cheek, and my vision sparked. But I held tight, slamming my elbow into his side. He groaned, trying to squirm away. You're out of your mind, Mason, he gasped. Get off! I'm stone cold sober, I snarled, pressing my arm against his throat. But I've seen some really interesting footage today. His face went pale. Abigail let out a choked noise behind me. I'm pregnant, she yelled out of nowhere. I'm pregnant, and you're acting like a maniac. That hit me like a brick. I stared up at Abigail, my arm still pinning Keith's throat to the ground. Tears streaked her face, her hand pressed against her stomach like she was shielding something precious. Keith's eyes bugged out, shocked. Pregnant? He croaked under his breath. I let go of him and got to my feet, slow and deliberate. My hands were scraped raw, blood oozing from the knuckles. Keith's shirt was ripped, and a bruise was already blooming around his eye. How far along? I asked Abigail, my voice low. 8 weeks, she muttered, staring at the grass. I glanced at Keith, still sprawled on the patio, looking like he'd been hit by a truck, then back at her. Well, congrats, I said, barely above a whisper. I turned and walked away, brushing past Vernon, who reached out to stop me, and Marla, who was shielding Owen's eyes from the chaos. I headed to the shed, standing there, staring at the tool bench where I'd seen them in that video just hours before. Behind me, Abigail's sobs mixed with Keith's stammered excuses to anyone who'd listen. The sharp smell of burnt ribs wafted in from the grill. I pulled out my phone and dialed my boss, Curtis. Curtis, it's Mason. I need some time off. You all right, man? He asked. I looked around the shed, at the tools I'd arranged just so, at the grease stain on the floor I'd been meaning to scrub. Nah, I said, things are pretty messed up. The next morning, my phone lit up with a group text starting at 6:12 a.m. I'd crashed in my truck in the driveway after Abigail changed the locks on me. Marla, can someone tell me what went down yesterday? Evelyn, Abigail's mom. Mason lost it. Poor Abigail's a wreck. Vernon. Guy's got issues. Always has. I scrolled through a dozen messages, all making me out to be the bad guy, until I hit one from my uncle Walt in Billings. Walt. Hold on, there's got to be more to this. Mason doesn't just snap. Evelyn. He attacked Keith for no reason, right in front of a kid. Abigail. I can't even face him. I'm sick over this. I shut off my phone and walked to the front door. My key was useless. She'd swapped the locks overnight. Through the window, I spotted my coffee mug on the kitchen counter, left there from Saturday when I still thought we were solid. By 10 a.m., a police car rolled into the driveway. Officer Delgado stepped out, looking sorry but all business. Mr. Hayes, I've got a temporary restraining order here. You need to stay 100 yards from your wife and this property. My hands shook as I took the papers. This is my house. I've been paying for it for 15 years. I get it, sir, he said, but you gotta leave for now. Talk to a lawyer about the property. I glanced past him at the house, at the bedroom window where I swore I saw the curtain move. Can I at least grab some clothes? Not without her, okay, and an escort. I let out a bitter chuckle. Her permission for my own stuff. Delgado shifted, uneasy. Just doing my job, sir. I drove to a rundown motel on the edge of Omaha, the kind where the clerk doesn't care who you are and the vending machines are always busted. $30 a night, weekly rates available. I paid for a week with my card and sank onto a bed that reeked of bleach and regret. My phone pinged, a Facebook alert. Abigail had posted a photo of her and Keith at a fancy Spanish restaurant downtown, sitting close, his arm draped over her shoulder. Caption, new chapter #, grateful #, moving on. 50 likes in half an hour, including one from my own dad. I saved a screenshot, then headed to the public library to use their computers and look up divorce lawyers. Attorney Carla Vance had an office in a restored brick building near the heart of town. Her receptionist, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, eyed me like she was sizing up whether I could cover the consultation. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Vance is ready for you," she said. Carla was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a sharp gaze and a handshake that could crush stone. Her office was all polished wood and thick law books, a place where real problems got sorted. "Lay it out for me," she said as I settled into a leather chair across from her desk. I spilled everything: the video, the brawl, the restraining order, the Facebook post. She scribbled notes on a legal pad, her face unreadable. "You still have the video?" she asked when I was done. "It's on the tablet, but it's in the house, and I'm locked out." "We'll subpoena it," she said. "And the pregnancy she mentioned?" 8 weeks, she said. "We haven't been close in about 3 months. She jotted that down. "We'll push for a paternity test after the birth. For now, we file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and alienation of affection." Nebraska's fault laws give us a good shot. She overplayed her hand with that restraining order. "How long's this going to take?" I asked. "Depends on how much she fights," Carla said. "But with video evidence and her bad faith restraining order, we're in a strong position." I left her office with a flicker of something I hadn't felt since Saturday: hope. That night, I drove by the house after midnight. Keith's truck was parked in my spot. I ended up renting a room above a tire shop owned by a guy named Gus. It was a bare-bones place. 1 room, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with a shower that dribbled more than it sprayed. But it was cheap, available, and Gus didn't ask for a credit check. "You look like life's kicked you around," he said, tossing me the keys. "Rent's due on the 1st. Don't trash the place." My neighbor was a former Navy guy named Roland, late 40s, with gray creeping into his hair and the calm of someone who'd seen the worst and come out the other side. He helped me haul my few things up the creaky stairs. "Wife trouble?" he asked, not prying, just reading the situation. "Soon-to-be ex-wife," I said. "Kids?" "None that are mine, looks like." Roland nodded like he'd heard it all before. "Have you eaten yet? Got some leftover stew in the fridge." We sat in his place, a mirror image of my bare-bones apartment, but somehow lived in. Photos on the walls, a stack of novels on a shelf, a beat-up acoustic guitar propped in the corner. "How long have you been out?" I asked. 9 years, he said. "Did 3 tours in Iraq. Came home to find my wife had drained our savings and run off to Denver with her Pilates coach." "What did you do about it?" I asked. Roland took a pull from his beer, his smile sharp and grim. "Got creative." Over the next week, Roland turned into my unexpected guide in the art of calculated payback. He showed me how to keep tabs on someone, how to bide my time, and how to draw the line between justice and just being spiteful. "The trick," he said while we set up a tiny camera in a lot across from Keith's gym, "is to stay on the right side of the law. You just let them dig their own graves." The camera was motion-triggered, uploading clips to a cloud server. Perfectly legal since it was aimed at a public lot. If it caught Keith's comings and goings, well, that was just a bonus. "Now what?" I asked. "Now you sit tight and watch," Roland said. "Guys like your cousin always hand you the rope. You just gotta wait to pull it." I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Ellen Harper, not to patch myself up, but to figure out how I'd been so blind. How long has this been going on? And most importantly, how could I use what I learned? "Tell me about your marriage," Dr. Harper said at our first meeting in her quiet office in downtown Omaha. "My wife's pregnant with my cousin's kid, and half my family thinks I'm a violent drunk," I said, leaning back in the chair. "How's that for a start?" She didn't blink. "How's that making you feel? Like torching everything I've got?" "That's a natural reaction to betrayal," she said, jotting something down. "But what are you going to do with that anger?" I gave her a tight smile. "Something useful." The footage from Keith's gym was a goldmine. He wasn't just cozying up to Abigail. There was a blonde pulling up in a silver Audi twice a week, a brunette in leggings who lingered after hours, and at least 3 other women getting what looked like very hands-on training sessions. Keith was playing the field, and players always leave a trail. I spent my nights at the library digging into everything I could find on him: social media, business licenses, even old college records. Turns out he'd been let go from 2 prior gym jobs for crossing lines with clients. He owed $15,000 in back taxes. His training certification had lapsed 8 months ago. All of it was public, all of it legal, all of it ammunition. One evening, I tailed him to a Comfort Inn on the west side of Omaha. He met the blonde with the Audi in the lot, and they headed to room 214. I sat in my truck with a long lens camera Roland had lent me, snapping shots of everything. 2 hours later, they strolled out, her giving him a quick kiss before he patted her hip like he was staking a claim. She laughed and slid into her car. I followed her to a tidy neighborhood in West Omaha. The mailbox read, Carson. I noted the address. The next day, I checked property records. Daniel and Laura Carson, married 14 years, 3 kids. Daniel's LinkedIn said he was a sales director for a medical supply company, always on the road. I didn't plan to use the info yet, but it was like having a loaded gun in a safe. Good to know it was there. Slapping a GPS tracker under Keith's truck was simpler than I thought. Roland showed me how to use a magnetic case that clung to the frame, hidden unless you knew where to check. Military grade, he said, handing me the small device. Battery lasts 6 months, pings every 10 minutes. Just don't get caught. I waited until 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, when Keith was probably passed out in my bed with my wife. The thought made my teeth grind, but I swallowed the rage. Anger makes you careless, and I couldn't afford that. His jacked-up Chevy was parked in my driveway like he owned the place. I slid underneath, found a spot on the rear axle, and stuck the tracker on. In and out in under a minute. The next day, I tracked Keith's movements on my laptop like a hunter watching a deer. Gym, work, burger joint for lunch, back to the gym, then dinner at my house. A boring routine that made spying easy. But on Thursday, things spiced up. At 1:43 p.m., Keith left the gym and drove to a Hilton in the city center. He stayed for 87 minutes, then headed to a medical office on Dodge Street. I looked up the address, Dr. Lisa Morrow, OB-GYN, so they were keeping the baby. Part of me had hoped Abigail would snap out of it, but it seemed her judgment was as broken as the rest of her. Friday afternoon, Keith veered off script. Instead of heading home after work, he swung by a liquor store, then drove to a neighborhood I didn't know in East Omaha. The tracker showed him parked on Cedar Lane for 3 hours. I decided to check it out. The house was a neat split level with a trimmed lawn and a Toyota Corolla in the driveway. Through the living room window, I saw Keith on a couch with a redhead I didn't recognize. Young, maybe mid-20s, perched on his lap while he held a glass of wine to her lips. Abigail thought she was special. Abigail was clueless. I was snapping photos through the window when Keith's head whipped toward the door. He muttered something to the redhead, who slid off him fast. Seconds later, he was out the front door, scanning the street. I ducked behind a neighbor's fence, but it was too late. He'd spotted my truck. "Hey," he yelled, jogging toward me. "What are you doing, you creep?" I bolted, not because I was scared of Keith, but because a stalking charge would tank everything I'd been building. I reached my truck and fired it up just as he got to the street. "Mason, you're pathetic," he shouted, smacking my tailgate as I peeled out. "I'm calling the cops." I floored it toward the warehouse district on the south side of Omaha, a tangle of storage yards and factories I knew like the back of my hand. Keith might try to tail me, but I'd make him work for it. His headlights popped up in my rear view about a mile later. That jacked-up Chevy of his had more horsepower than my old truck, but I had 2 decades of navigating these streets on my side. I whipped a sharp left into the lot of a steel mill, then cut right between 2 massive sheds. Keith stayed on me, his tires screeching against the pavement. I caught a glimpse of his face in my side mirror, eyes wild, jaw tight with fury. I led him deeper into the maze, weaving through tight alleys lined with rusted tanks and loading docks. Then I cranked the wheel hard, tucked my truck behind a cluster of shipping containers, killed the engine, and hopped out. Keith's truck roared past, the growl of his engine bouncing off the metal walls. "Come out, you spineless jerk," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty lot. I crouched between 2 containers, keeping my breath slow and steady, just like Roland had shown me. Keith circled for a good 15 minutes, cursing and getting madder by the second. Finally, he peeled out, gravel flying. When I was sure he was gone, I walked back to my truck. A scrap of paper was tucked under the wiper, scrawled with Keith's messy handwriting. "Next time I see you, you're done, cousin." I folded it and slipped it into my pocket, evidence for down the road. That night, I called Roland and filled him in. "He's losing it," Roland said. "That's perfect. Desperate guys screw up." "What kind of screw up?" I asked. "The kind that buries them." Abigail's baby shower was set for Sunday afternoon at her mom's place in a quiet suburb of Lincoln. I wasn't invited, obviously, but restraining orders only go so far. They block you from people and specific addresses, not public streets. Evelyn's house sat on a corner lot with a wide driveway, and room for plenty of cars. I counted 16 vehicles when I pulled up at 2:15 p.m., including Keith's truck parked snug against Abigail's SUV like they were already playing house. I sat in my truck for a bit, watching through the big front windows. Abigail was unwrapping gifts, surrounded by women who'd known me for years, but had no issue toasting her pregnancy with my cousin's kid. On the passenger seat was an envelope with DNA results I'd gotten through a shady connection of Roland's, a lab tech who'd run tests on samples I'd swiped from Keith's gym bag and Abigail's hairbrush. The results were no surprise, but seeing them in print still felt like a kick to the chest. I stepped out of my truck and walked up to the porch. Through the glass door, I could see Abigail in a chair decked out with blue and silver ribbons, laughing at something Marla said, her hand resting on a small baby bump. I hit the doorbell. The chatter inside cut off like someone flipped a switch. I heard a whisper. "Oh God, it's Mason." Evelyn opened the door, her face already set in a scowl. "Mason, you can't be here." "The restraining order doesn't cover your house, Evelyn. Can I come in?" "No way. Abigail doesn't want you here." "I've got something she'll want to see," I said. Abigail appeared behind her mom, wearing a soft green dress that made her look younger than she had any right to. "What do you want, Mason?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes nervous. I held up the envelope. "Just dropping off a little gift for the baby." "I'm calling the cops," Evelyn said, grabbing her phone. "Go for it," I said, stepping past her into the living room. 24 women stared at me like I was a stray dog crashing their brunch. Keith shot up from the couch, his face flushed with anger and shame. "Get out," he growled. "I'll leave," I said, unzipping my jacket, "right after I share this." I waved the envelope, the Genetic Labs logo clear on the front. "These DNA results say the baby Abigail's carrying isn't mine." The room went dead silent. Abigail's face drained of color, her hands gripping the chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Isn't it?" I pulled out the report. 0% chance I'm the father. Want me to read the fine print? Evelyn stormed forward, her eyes blazing. "How dare you!" Her hand cracked across my face, the slap ringing out. My head turned, but I didn't budge. "Feel better?" I asked. Keith started toward me, but I was ready this time. I grabbed a nearby table covered with gift bags and shoved it toward him. He stumbled back, presents spilling across the floor. "Stay back," I warned. "You've done enough damage." I turned to Abigail, who was crying now, mascara streaking her face. 20 years, I said, my voice low. "I loved you for 20 years. I'd have died for you, Abigail. I'd have raised that kid, convinced myself it was mine, because I loved you that much." I dropped the DNA report at her feet. "But you couldn't even let me have that choice. You had to make me the bad guy." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called the police. "Here's the kicker," I said, scanning the stunned faces around me. "This isn't even Keith's first side hustle. He's been stepping out on you with at least 4 other women since this started. Did you think you were the only one?" Abigail let out a choked sob, like she'd been stabbed. Keith's face went from red to ghost white. "That's a lie," he stammered. I pulled out my phone and flashed a photo from the Comfort Inn, Keith and the blonde locking lips in the lot. "Monday night," I said. "Room 214. Want to see the rest?" I headed for the door as police cars rolled into the driveway. As I passed Keith, I leaned in close and whispered, "Time's up, cousin." Abigail's job in marketing had always been her pride and joy, long before we ever met. Abigail had started as a junior assistant at a small firm and clawed her way up to senior account executive at Carver & Stone, one of Omaha's top PR agencies. She had a knack for it, too. Could turn a train wreck into a feel-good story like nobody's business. I used to tease her that she could make a con artist look like a choir boy. On Monday, she was set to pitch a big campaign to Horizon Properties, a major client looking to rebrand their upscale condos. It was the kind of deal that could put her on the map. I knew because Keith had been dumb enough to brag about it on Instagram. "So proud of my lady nailing this huge pitch. #power couple, #winning." The love letter I'd found in Keith's gym bag was written on Abigail's fancy personal stationery, the kind with her name embossed in gold. 3 pages of mushy details about their affair, including their plan to skip town for Portland after the baby arrived. "I can't wait to build our life there," she'd written. "Just us and the little one. Mason won't ever track us down." She'd signed it, "Always yours," with a smudge of red lipstick below her name. I made plenty of copies. The audio clips were even better. Keith had a habit of leaving voicemails when Abigail didn't pick up, and she kept every single one. I'd found them on the tablet before it got locked away in the house, 29 messages, some sweet, some flirty, all completely incriminating. My favorite was from a month back. Babe, I know you're torn up about Mason, but he's dragging you down. You're too sharp, too gorgeous for him. Once we're in Portland, you'll see how much better life is without all this small-town weight. I spent Sunday night setting up anonymous email accounts and uploading the files to secure cloud servers. Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., half an hour before Abigail's big pitch, I sent the whole package to every executive at Carver & Stone. The subject line, character reference for Abigail Hayes, senior account executive. I also fired it off to Horizon Properties leadership, Abigail's mom Evelyn, and every contact on her Facebook list. Then I parked my truck across from the Carver & Stone office and waited. Abigail's blue SUV rolled into the parking garage at 8:50 a.m. A little late, probably spent extra time primping for the big day. Keith's truck pulled in right behind her, which caught me off guard. Maybe he was planning a victory lunch after her pitch. At 9:15 a.m., people started trickling out of the building. First one, then a few more, then a small crowd huddling on the sidewalk, all staring at their phones. Keith bolted out at 9:20 a.m., head down, face flushed, glancing back like he was being hunted. Abigail stumbled out 5 minutes later, moving like she was in a trance. Her perfect hair was a mess, and she clutched her presentation folders loosely against her chest. When she reached her SUV, she froze, staring into space. Then she hurled her briefcase at the garage wall, papers exploding like a snowstorm, fluttering across the concrete. That night, the local news picked it up. A prominent Omaha PR executive has been let go after compromising audio recordings and private letters surfaced during a client meeting. The anchor said Abigail Hayes, 36, was fired from Carver & Stone for conduct unbecoming of professional standards. They didn't name Keith, but the details about the unnamed male fitness coach were enough for anyone paying attention to connect the dots. My phone rang at 11:45 p.m. Abigail's number. "You ruined me," she said, her voice flat, like she'd been hollowed out. "You ruined yourself," I shot back. "I just made sure everyone saw it. That was my career, Mason. Everything I built." "Yeah, and this was my marriage. Everything I built." She went quiet. In the background, I heard Keith muttering something, too muffled to make out. "We're leaving town," she said finally. "Good riddance," I replied. "The baby's not mine. We've cleared that up." Another long pause. "I didn't mean for it to go like this," she whispered. "Sure you did. You just didn't think you'd get caught." I hung up and powered off my phone. Outside, the neon sign from the tire shop flickered red and green across the lot. It wasn't much, but it was real. More real than anything I'd had in years. Carla Vance, my lawyer, called Tuesday morning with news that made me crack my first real smile in weeks. "The restraining order's been lifted," she said. Abigail's domestic violence claims fell apart after her very public affair hit the news. The judge ruled she filed it in bad faith to get an edge in the divorce. "What's that mean for me?" I asked. "It means you can go home, Mason. She's got 48 hours to clear her stuff out of the house." I drove to my place, for the first time in 3 weeks. The key didn't work. Abigail hadn't given me the new one. A locksmith fixed that in 15 minutes. Inside, everything looked familiar, but felt like a stranger's life. Our wedding photos were still on the fireplace, but someone had flipped them face down. The dining table where we'd shared coffee every morning for 15 years felt like a movie set. Keith's crap was everywhere. Protein shakes on the counter, gym clothes in the laundry, his cologne in our bathroom. I piled it all into trash bags and left them on the porch. Then I called a cleaning crew to scrub the place top to bottom. The divorce hearing was set for Thursday morning. Abigail showed up with a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be golfing. Keith showed up to the hearing in a cheap suit that hung off him like he was a kid raiding his dad's closet. Abigail's lawyer, a guy named Mr. Carver, kicked things off. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges strains in her marriage, but she disputes the claims of fraud and abandonment." Judge Thompson cut him off, raising a hand. "Mr. Carver, have you seen the evidence from the petitioner?" Carver fumbled with his papers. "Yes, Your Honor, but my client's personal choices, while imperfect, don't justify—" The judge stopped him cold. "Your client filed a baseless domestic violence report, secured a restraining order under false pretenses, changed the locks to bar her husband from their home, and is now living with another man while pregnant with his child. She's actively tried to deceive this court and her husband." He leaned forward. "I'm granting Mr. Hayes' motion for immediate possession of the marital home and all its assets." Abigail started sobbing. Keith reached for her hand, but she yanked it away. Additionally, the judge went on, I'm ordering a paternity test after the child's birth. If Mr. Hayes is not the father, Mrs. Hayes will cover all legal fees and court costs. Your Honor, Carver tried again, my client is pregnant and has no place to go. She should have thought of that before committing adultery and lying to this court, Judge Thompson said, his voice like ice. This court doesn't reward fraud. Mr. Hayes, the home is yours. Mrs. Hayes, you have until Friday at 6 p.m. to collect your belongings. Outside in the courthouse parking lot, Keith jogged up to me, trying to look tough in his ill-fitting suit. This ain't over, Mason, he growled. It's over, I said, calm as could be. You just haven't caught up yet. Abigail needs me. We're having a kid. She needs someone who can afford that kid. Last I checked, jobless trainers with expired licenses don't bring in much cash. His face turned beet red. I'll figure something out. Good luck, I said. Your name's Mud around here. I started walking away, but he grabbed my arm. She loves me, not you, he said, his voice cracking. I looked at his hand, then his face. Keith, she's a liar who torched a 20-year marriage for a quick fling in my shed. What makes you think she won't do the same to you? He dropped my arm like it was hot coal. Behind us on the courthouse steps, Abigail was crying into her phone, probably to Evelyn. She looked small, broken, not at all like the woman who'd humiliated me in front of everyone. For a split second, I almost felt bad. Almost. 3 days later, Keith got canned from Prime Fit Gym. The owner, Greg Larson, called me himself. Mason, just wanted you to know I had to let Keith go. This whole mess was too much drama for our clients. Thanks for the heads up, Greg, I said. Sorry it came to this. I thought Keith was solid, but I misjudged him. Keith tried to bounce back with a YouTube channel called Fit Truth. His first video, My Truth, got 412 views and a handful of comments, mostly from people who knew him and weren't buying his excuses. One read, Dude, you hooked up with your cousin's wife. There's no your truth here. His second video, a workout demo shot in his tiny apartment, pulled 103 views. The third, where he rambled about misunderstandings with his certification, got 28 views before he yanked it down. I didn't have to lift a finger to tank his channel. He did that himself. But I did send the link, along with photos of his other flings, to a couple of fitness influencers I'd found online. They shared it with their followers as a cautionary tale of what not to do in the industry. Within days, Keith's channel was a laughingstock, with screenshots of his weak excuses bouncing around fitness forums with captions like, When you think cheating with your cousin's wife is a career move. Meanwhile, I was putting my life back together. I took a week off work to gut the house of every trace of Abigail and Keith. Fresh paint in the bedroom, new bedding, new couch in the living room. I even swapped out the tool bench in the shed, though I kept the old one in storage for the divorce case. The backyard got a full overhaul. I ripped out the garden beds Abigail had planted while scheming behind my back, built a new deck around the grill, and added some sleek outdoor lights. When I was done, the place felt like mine again. Clean, simple, me. Vernon swung by one Saturday afternoon while I was firing up the new grill. He stood at the edge of the deck, taking in the changes. Looks sharp, son, he said. Real sharp. We hadn't talked since the 4th of July blow-up, but he didn't bring it up. Vernon was always better at showing up late than explaining himself. Want a beer? I asked. Don't mind if I do. We stood on the deck, sipping Coors and watching the sun dip over suburban Omaha. For the first time in months, I felt a hint of calm. You know, Vernon said after a bit, I never cared much for that Keith kid. Could have fooled me, I said. You two seem pretty chummy at the barbecue. Sometimes you gotta let folks tie their own noose. Give them time. They'll show you who they are. Is that your way of saying sorry? I asked. He finished his beer and set the bottle on the railing. I ain't great at apologies, Mason, but I'm proud of how you handled this. Could have gone a lot uglier. It's not done yet, I said. Nope, he agreed, but you're coming out on top. That night, Abigail called from a blocked number. I need to grab the rest of my stuff, she said, straight to the point. Court gave you until Friday at 6 p.m. That was 3 days ago. Please, Mason, she said, her voice shaky. I've got no place to store it. Should have thought of that before shacking up with my cousin. He's gone, she said, barely above a whisper. I stopped, my beer halfway to my mouth. Come again. Keith left yesterday, said he needed to figure things out. I let out a dry laugh. Guess the idea of supporting a pregnant, jobless woman lost its shine. Don't, she said, her voice cracking. Just don't. Where are you staying? My mom's, but she's Not thrilled with me right now. I could picture it. Evelyn, who'd built her whole identity around having a perfect daughter, probably wasn't thrilled to have Abigail back home, pregnant and disgraced. I'll box your things and leave them on the porch, I said. Pick them up tomorrow. Mason, she said, hesitating, do you hate me? I thought about it, really thought about it. The woman who'd slept beside me for 20 years, who'd laughed at my dumb jokes and held me together when my mom passed, who'd also blown up everything we had for a fling with my cousin. No, I said finally. I don't hate you, Abigail, but I don't love you anymore either. And that's worse, isn't it? She hung up without a word. 3 weeks later, I decided to throw another barbecue. Not to forgive anybody or patch things up. I just wanted to see how this mess played out. I sent invites to the same crew from the 4th of July disaster: Vernon, Marla, Owen, Uncle Walt, Aunt Lillian, even Evelyn. The message was short. Second chance barbecue, same ribs, fresh start. Saturday, 2 p.m. Most of them showed up, probably out of sheer curiosity. Vernon got there first, lugging a 6-pack of Coors and wearing the same faded shirt from the last barbecue. Marla came with Owen, who seemed half nervous, half excited. Uncle Walt drove in from Billings. Evelyn was the shocker. I didn't expect her to show, given how far her daughter's life had fallen. But there she was at 2:10, carrying a bowl of coleslaw and wearing a tight-lipped look like she had something to get off her chest. Mason, she said, setting the bowl on the table, thanks for having me. Thanks for coming, I replied. I owe you an apology, she said. That caught me off guard. Evelyn, you don't... No, let me finish. I was wrong. When Abigail said you went after Keith for no reason, I bought it. I should have known better. You were standing up for yourself. I was propping up her mistakes. Before I could respond, the rumble of Keith's truck pulled everyone's attention to the driveway. I hadn't invited him, but someone must have tipped him off. Abigail climbed out of the passenger side, moving slow, her pregnancy now obvious at 5 months. Keith trailed her, looking like he was headed to a firing squad. This'll be good, Vernon muttered under his breath. They stepped into the backyard, but their vibe told the real story. Keith hung back, ready to run at the first sign of trouble, while Abigail kept her eyes on the ground, her face pale and tired. Hi, everyone, she said softly. The replies were polite but frosty. These folks had known her forever, watched her grow up, toasted our wedding. Seeing her pregnant with another man's kid had flipped their loyalties in ways nobody expected. Hope it's okay we stopped by, Keith said, trying to sound breezy. We were nearby. Actually, I said, walking over to the grill, I'm glad you're here. Got something for you. I reached into the cooler and pulled out an envelope. Keith's face went ghost white when he saw it. What's that? Abigail asked, her voice tight. Why don't you open it and find out, I said, handing it to Keith. His hands shook as he tore it open and scanned the contents, his expression sliding from pale to ashen. He looked up at me, panic in his eyes. What's it say? Abigail demanded. Keith tried to speak but choked on the words, just passing her the paper. She read it once, then again, then a third time. When she finally looked up, her face was gray. This can't be right, she whispered. What is it? Marla asked, stepping closer. Abigail glanced around at the circle of staring faces, searching for words she didn't have. It's another DNA test, she said, her voice barely there. And, Evelyn pressed. Abigail's words came out like a ghost. Keith's not the father either. The silence was so thick you could have heard a leaf fall in downtown Omaha. Keith finally sputtered, That's impossible. We've been together for months. Not just with her, apparently, I said. What's that supposed to mean? Abigail asked, her voice sharp. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I'd snapped on Cedar Lane. Keith cozying up with the redhead in her living room. I flipped through the photos on my phone, landing on the ones of Keith with the young redhead. Meet Tara, I said. 23, barista at the coffee shop on Dodge Street. Keith's been cozying up to her since February. Keith's face collapsed. Abigail, I can explain, he stammered. Can you? She snapped, her voice climbing. Can you explain how you've been sneaking around with someone else while swearing you loved me? While promising we'd build a life together? It didn't mean anything to her, Keith pleaded, his voice desperate. You're the one I want. Then whose baby is this? Abigail shouted, her hands on her stomach. Every head in the backyard turned to me. I took a slow sip of my beer, letting the moment sink in. From what I've dug up, I said, cool as could be, you might want to ask that yoga instructor from the fitness center, the one you were seeing before Keith. Abigail let out a sound like a wounded dog. How'd you know? Security cameras are everywhere, Abigail, I said. You'd be shocked what you can find if you know where to look. Keith hurled his beer bottle at the grill, the glass shattering with a crash that made everyone flinch. You bastard, he roared. You set this whole thing up? I didn't set anything up, I said, keeping my tone steady. I just let you two be yourselves. The bottle had clipped the propane tank, and a sharp hiss filled the air as gas started leaking. People backed away from the grill, the smell of propane spreading fast. Keith, you moron, Vernon barked. You just busted the gas line. But Keith wasn't hearing it. He came at me, fist balled, his face twisted with fury and shame. I'm gonna end you, he growled. I pulled out my phone and hit record, holding it up for all to see. You just threatened to take me out in front of a dozen witnesses, I said, while trashing my property in a tantrum. That's assault, terroristic threats, and vandalism. The hissing from the grill got louder. Uncle Walt was already calling 911. Keith, we need to go, Abigail said, grabbing his arm. But he was too far gone. He lunged, swinging wild punches I dodged easily. I'd been ready for this for weeks. I caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted his arm behind his back, and slammed him into the deck railing. He hit the ground hard, blood pouring from his nose. Stay down, I told him. He didn't listen. He scrambled up and charged again, tackling me toward the damaged grill. That's when the propane caught. It wasn't some Hollywood explosion, no massive fireball or shockwave, just a quick whoosh of flames that swallowed the grill area and sent everyone scrambling. Keith and I were closest. The heat singed my arm hair and left my face stinging like a bad sunburn, but we rolled clear before it could do worse. Holy hell! Vernon shouted, pulling Evelyn back from the fire. Everyone, get clear! The fire department rolled up 6 minutes later, followed by 2 cop cars and an ambulance. They doused the flames in under 10 minutes, but my new deck was scorched black, and the grill was a mangled heap of metal. Keith sat on the curb, a paramedic wiping blood from his face, while Officer Delgado took statements. Keith's story kept shifting. First, I'd attacked him out of nowhere. Then the explosion was an accident. Then I'd somehow rigged it. My story stayed the same because it was the truth. Keith threatened me, chucked a bottle at my grill, and started a brawl that led to property damage and injuries. Mr. Hayes, Delgado said after talking to everyone, you want to press charges? I looked at Keith, now in handcuffs, his shirt torn, blood staining his collar, his life in tatters. Yeah, I said, every single one. Abigail was on the front steps, crying softly while Marla tried to console her. She looked broken, a woman who'd bet everything on the wrong guy and lost it all. Mason, she called as the cops prepped to haul Keith away. Can we talk? I walked over. Up close, she looked worn out, new lines around her eyes, her skin pale from stress and sleepless nights. What do you want, Abigail? I'm sorry, she said, her voice small. For everything. Keith, the lies, the restraining order, all of it. I know you are. Do you think, could we ever? No, I said, not harshly. We can't. She nodded like she'd known it was coming. What am I supposed to do now? You'll figure it out, I said. You're a smart woman, but that baby's not my problem. She winced but didn't argue. She knew it was true. Keith was loaded into the police car, still yelling he was innocent. He pressed his face to the window, glaring at me with raw hatred. I stared back until the car turned the corner. Well, Vernon said, eyeing the wrecked deck, that was something. One way to put it, I replied. The guests started clearing out soon after. Evelyn surprised me with a quick hug before she left. Uncle Walt said he'd call soon. Marla helped a shaken Abigail into her car and drove off without another word. By 6:30 p.m., it was just me and Vernon in the ruined backyard, sipping beers and staring at the charred remains of my grill setup. You planned this, he said, not asking. I planned to show the truth, I said. Keith chose the rest. That DNA test proving Keith wasn't the father? That was legit, I said. Vernon nodded. Had it run twice to be sure. Turns out Abigail's been busier than any of us thought. He shook his head. That girl always thought she was cleverer than she was, juggling 3 guys like they'd never catch on. 4, I corrected. There's also some dude named Trevor from her Pilates class. Good Lord, Vernon muttered. We stood there in easy silence, watching the last curls of smoke drift up from the wrecked grill. What's next? He asked. Keith's headed to jail for a bit. Abigail's got to figure out how to raise someone else's kid. And me? I start fresh. You sound all right with that, he said, eyeing me. I thought it over. My marriage was done. My cousin was behind bars. My backyard looked like a bomb site. But for the first time in months, I felt something close to calm. Yeah, I said. I think I'm okay. That night, I kicked back on my front porch with a beer, watching the sun sink over the Omaha skyline. Tomorrow, I'd start cleaning up the backyard mess. Next week, I'd shop for a new grill. Maybe next month, I'd dip my toe into dating again. But tonight, I was good just sitting there, soaking in the quiet, knowing nobody was feeding me lies for the first time since July. My phone pinged with a text from Roland. Caught the news. You holding up? I typed back. Better than ever. Beer at my place? Be there at 10, he replied. I grinned and took another sip. It was shaping up to be a decent night. The next morning, the Omaha World-Herald had the story I'd been waiting for. Local man arrested after altercation, sparks backyard fire. Keith's mugshot was splashed across the local section, looking every bit like the small-time hustler who'd bitten off more than he could chew. The charges were heavy: assault, terroristic threats, property damage, and violating a peace bond from the baby shower fiasco. His bail was set at $12,000. Might as well have been $1 million for a guy with no job and no savings. Abigail tried to scrape together the cash, but Evelyn shut her down. She'd had enough of her daughter's bad calls. Marla set up a GoFundMe that limped to $42 before she pulled it down, humiliated. Keith sat in county lockup for 5 days before taking a plea deal. 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, restitution for my wrecked deck, plus mandatory anger management and community service. Abigail visited him once, according to public visitor logs. She stayed for 9 minutes. The truth about the baby's father came out at Keith's sentencing. Abigail had to submit to a court-ordered DNA test, and the results backed up what I'd already figured. The father was Daniel Harper, a married yoga instructor from the Westside Fitness Club. Harper didn't stick around to face the fallout. He bolted to Nevada with his wife and 3 kids, leaving behind a resignation email and no contact info. Abigail was left high and dry, pregnant, jobless, and untouchable in Omaha's professional circles. She lasted 2 weeks at Evelyn's before her mom told her to find somewhere else. She ended up in a weekly rental studio on the edge of town, the kind of place that doesn't care about your credit score or your past. The DNA test that showed Keith wasn't the father? That was real, I said. Vernon nodded. Had it checked twice to be sure. Abigail's been playing a bigger game than anyone knew. He shook his head. That girl always thought she could outsmart everyone, keeping 4 guys on the hook without them noticing. 5, I said. There's also some guy named Colin from her spin class. Lord Almighty, Vernon muttered. We stood there quiet, watching the last wisps of smoke curl up from the charred grill. What's next? He asked. Keith's locked up for a bit. Abigail's got to figure out how to raise someone else's kid. Me? I'm starting over. You sound all right with that, he said, glancing at me. I thought it over. My marriage was gone. My cousin was in jail. My backyard was a mess. But for the first time in forever, I felt a kind of peace. Yeah, I said. I'm okay. That night, I sat on my front porch with a Coors, watching the sun dip over Omaha's suburbs. Tomorrow, I'd start fixing the backyard. Next week, I'll hunt for a new grill. Maybe next month, I'd think about dating again. But tonight, I was good just sitting there, knowing nobody was feeding me lies for the first time since July. My phone buzzed with a text from Roland. Saw the news. Are you good? I typed back. Better than good. Beer at my place? There at 15, he replied. I smiled and took another sip. It was gonna be a solid night. The next morning's Omaha World-Herald had the headline I'd been waiting for. Local man jailed after backyard brawl sparks fire. Keith's mugshot took up space in the local section, looking like the small-time hustler who'd gotten in too deep. The charges were no joke. Assault, terroristic threats, property damage, and violating a peace bond from the baby shower mess. Bail was set at $12,000. Might as well have been $1 million for a guy with no job or savings. Abigail tried to scrape together the money, but Evelyn wouldn't budge. She was done bailing out her daughter's bad choices. Marla started a GoFundMe that fizzled at $45 before she yanked it down, mortified. Keith sat in county for 5 days before taking a plea. 6 months in jail, 2 years probation, restitution for my deck, plus anger management and community service. Abigail visited him once, per the public logs, for a grand total of 9 minutes. The baby's paternity came out at Keith's sentencing. A court-ordered DNA test confirmed what I'd known. The father was Daniel Harper, a married yoga coach from Westside Fitness Club. Harper didn't stick around for the fallout. He split to Nevada with his wife and 3 kids, leaving just a resignation email. Abigail was left alone, pregnant, jobless, and a pariah in Omaha's professional scene. She lasted 2 weeks at Evelyn's before her mom told her to move out. She ended up in a weekly rental studio on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. I saw her once at the supermarket, pushing a cart through the produce aisle, loaded with off-brand cereal and clearance items. She saw me too, but we didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The insurance company covered the damage to my deck and grill, minus the deductible. I used the payout to build something better, a bigger deck, a top-notch smoker, and a fire pit for chilly nights. 6 weeks later, I threw another barbecue, keeping the guest list small and real. Vernon, Roland, Uncle Walt, and a couple guys from the construction site. No chaos, no explosions, just good eats and better company. Roland brought his guitar and strummed some Merle Haggard tunes by the fire pit. Vernon shared stories about his time in Korea I'd never heard before. I cooked the best ribs of my life. "You know what's wild?" I said as the fire burned low. "What's that?" Roland asked. "I'm happier now than I was 6 months ago. My wife cheated, my cousin trashed my place, my marriage is done, but I'm actually happier." "That ain't wild," Vernon said. "That's real. Sometimes you gotta torch the old life to build something better." Later, as I cleaned up, I thought about that. The old Mason had been fine with half-truths, scraping by on whatever affection Abigail tossed my way, pretending things were okay when they weren't. The new Mason wanted more, demanded honesty, wouldn't settle for less than I deserved. It cost me everything I thought I wanted, but it gave me something better, self-respect. My phone rang while I was rinsing dishes. Unknown number, but I knew the Seattle area code. "Mason," Abigail's voice came through, soft and unsure. "What do you want, Abigail?" "I had the baby. A girl, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She's beautiful." "Congrats," I said flat. "I named her Grace, after your mom." That hit me like a punch. My mom passed 9 years ago, and Abigail had been there through it all. The diagnosis, the chemo, the hospice days. She'd held my hand at the funeral, helped me clear out Mom's place. "Why?" I asked. "Because your mom was the only real mother I had," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I wanted my daughter to have something good tied to her." "Abigail, I don't want anything from you," I said. "I'm not asking for money or help or forgiveness," she said quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "How are you holding up?" I asked. "Got a job doing customer service calls. It's not much, but it covers rent. Grace is in daycare during the day, and I take care of her at night. We're managing." "Good. Keith called from jail last week. Wants to see me when he's out." "You gonna?" "No, I'm done with liars, maybe men altogether." We talked for 10 more minutes, steering clear of the heavy stuff. She told me about Grace's first giggle, her new apartment in a decent part of town, the online classes she was taking to finish her marketing degree. I told her about my promotion at work, Vernon's better health, and the herb garden I was planning for spring. It was the most honest talk we'd had in years. "Mason," she said as we wrapped up. "Yeah? Will you ever forgive me?" I looked out my kitchen window at the deck where it all went down, where Keith's tantrum set everything ablaze. The burn marks were gone, covered by new wood and stain, but I knew they were still there underneath. "I already have," I said, and realized it was true. After we hung up, I stepped out to the deck and stood where the old grill used to be. The new smoker was bigger, better, smoother than the last one. Still, I miss the old one sometimes. Its quirks, its hot spots, its familiar feel. Change was like that. Even when it's for the best, you mourn what's gone. I opened the smoker and checked the ribs I'd been cooking low and slow for hours. They were perfect, meat falling off the bone, smoke ring bold and deep. Nobody would burn me again. That was my promise to myself, and I'd keep it. But maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let someone light a spark in me again. I pulled the ribs out, set them to rest, and breathed in the rich, smoky aroma filling the night. Tomorrow I'd start fresh. Tonight I'd savor what I'd built.